Questions? Are there any further questions? I recognize the member from Fredericton South, leader of his party.
On the bill?
On the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. Can the minister tell us what the amount of the fuel, what are they calling it, fuel charge that's going to pass through in April will be?
Mr. Chair, to the member opposite, I'd like to just step back a minute and thank the member opposite from Bucktooth and the member opposite from Moncton South for introducing me to the Committee of the Whole. I very much enjoyed the opportunity to chat. I'm looking forward to discussing this and many other issues. Feel free to make contact far beyond just the floor of the legislature. I'd love to continue the conversation. Thank you. To the member opposite from the Green Party, we had gone through, there's 22 different fuels affected by the tax. There's only 4, however, that are regulated by Motion 11 that will be affected. We're looking at gasoline, furnace oil, diesel, and propane. And I've got the amounts here. Gasoline is going to be affected at 4.42 cents per liter. Diesel, 5.2 cents per liter. Home heating fuel, 5.37 cents per liter, and propane at 3.10 cents per liter.
So thank you, through the chair, for that response. So 4.42 cents per liter for gasoline. Can the minister tell us how much the price of gasoline varied between last May and January? By how much?
Mr. Chair, thank you to the question for the member opposite. It wouldn't be very fair of me to chide my friends from the Liberal Party for stepping outside of Motion 11 without offering the same information to you. That is information for a very specific period of time, which we don't have right here, but wouldn't have anyway, because that fluctuation in price has nothing to do with the regulatory framework and the formula and the changes as it relates to Motion 11.
Well, Mr. Chair, I would submit it has a lot to do with the way the minister has been describing this fuel charge as being imposed and unfair. Because, in fact, between May and January, the price of gasoline changed by 30 cents per liter. And I won't answer my follow-up question because it's going to give you the same answer. But between January and today, it's increased by 17 cents a liter. Now, this is imposed by the market, Mr. Chair. And so I haven't seen huge demonstrations outside the legislature about the 17 cents increase, 17 cents per liter increase since January. I would ask if he had the answer. I don't think he has either. What the average increase or change in gasoline prices is within a 3-week period, the average 3-week variation in gasoline prices per liter. But I'd submit it's not too far off the 4.42 cents per liter that represents the gas charge, the fuel charge for gasoline. So I see no evidence, Mr. Chair, for the calamity, the catastrophe that the minister and his colleagues seem to suggest are going to come about as a result of passing this fuel charge on to the gas pumps. But I would like to ask the minister what measures his department will take. Well, let me back up. First of all, can the minister confirm that the federal government is going to rebate household consumers essentially the carbon charge that they're going to be paying through their income tax? Will they see a rebate in the amount or more that they're paying in carbon pricing?
Mr. Chair, to the member opposite, you're talking about a federal rebate system. I mean, I can go on a website as quick as anybody else. I have no control over whether they're going to do it. I have no control over whether they're going to honor it. I mean, there's information on the website that indicates rebates or whatnot, but honestly, I don't generate those rebates. I don't negotiate those rebates, so I don't understand your question as that relates to motion 11, or even the relevance it would have with my department or any interaction I would have. That's a federally driven rebate that I have no control over.
Well, in some sense that's true, in some sense it's not. All Canadians, as Canadians, we're all, as of April 1st, can be paying a price on carbon pollution. Mr. Chair, the more you pollute, the more you pay. The less you pollute, the less you pay. So if you decide when your four-door family truck is run the end of its life to purchase a Hyundai or Elantra, you're going to save money on the carbon price. It's going to cost you a lot less money. That's the kind of behavior this could change, Mr. Chair. So this is important because the idea here with this fuel charge is it will influence purchasing choices over time. When people renew their vehicles, the prices are they're concerned about prices going up as a result of the fuel charge. They can buy a more fuel-efficient vehicle, no question. I would ask the minister, if he had the information, what increase in fuel efficiency would be needed to counterbalance the 4.42 cents per litre in carbon in the fuel charge.
Mr. Chair, to the member opposite, that's a question that I think if the vast majority of New Brunswickers had an opportunity to hear you say, buy a more fuel-efficient car, when they don't know if they can even make their car payments. That's a very frustrating statement. It's an out-of-touch statement, and I wish that you would do a little bit more research about how the New Brunswick population has to face a 4.2 cents. You're okay with 4.42, and then in the future when they renew their car, you must be good with 11 point. Where does it end? Where does it end that you're okay or you reach a tap? That's a very frustrating statement that you're making, and it's out of touch with people who are barely putting enough money in their bank account to get by. So I'm very frustrated at that. And furthermore, to talk to people in terms of their own personal financial budget while they're getting stuff, financial implications that are far beyond their control, it's a situation that is going to create the poverty initiatives, the inability to pay for heat, the inability to pay for groceries. You know what? I've heard lots of statements in this House about initiatives that we must take to do better, to serve those that are in need, and you just rubbed it in their face as far as I'm concerned. I'm very, very disappointed in that statement, Mr. Chair.
So, Mr. Chair, this is my point. Gasoline has gone up by 17 cents per litre since January, but I didn't hear anything from the minister responsible for energy about crisis or tackling the impact of that on New Brunswickers. Nothing. It went up 17 cents a litre since January. Nothing. So if he's so concerned about that, why hasn't he been raising Cain about that? Because the 17 cents a litre, Mr. Speaker, went up because of the market, not because of intentional public policy. And there's a double standard here. When it goes up by the market to enrich big oil, that's okay. But when it goes up because of public policy, that's a problem because he disagrees with it.
Mr. Chair, to the member opposite, because I didn't hear a question, I'll make my own statement. 17 cents per litre you're saying, is a direct feeding of big oil. At the same time, the member opposite has heard in the 6 short months that we've been in government, not even that, he's heard me talk about initiatives that we're exploring and looking into as it relates to green and renewable energies. Probably, I don't have the exact figures, but you could probably look and see 3 to 1 the efforts for green renewable energy over that. Now, I'm going to ring that back in because you took that as an opportunity to grandstand and stump against carbon, against a variety of different things, but you didn't mention motion 11 once. Love to sit down, love to bring you back to talk about the mechanism and the means of the way that goes, but I will not stand by and have comments that go out there that paint a government as being irresponsible while your initiatives would put people in a poorhouse.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd ask the Minister this, through you. There's going to be an additional $9 million in HST generated that the province intends to keep. Why would he not reduce the provincial excise tax on gasoline by an equivalent amount to avoid that impact on consumers?
Mr. Chair, to the member opposite, we're discussing a finance department issue as it relates to the collection of that revenue. It does not directly affect the mechanism or the formula related to Bill 11 and the flow-through of the carbon tax through the wholesale, the retail system, and ultimately the end user. Like I said, any detail right down to the penny related to motion 11, we have. You may draw correlations that a question like that's connected to it. I humbly submit that it's not, and I would suggest that at a time when you're dealing with budget issues related to finance, you raise that. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chair, it's a direct consequence of Bill 11 here. A direct consequence, and it's going to be the way this is being applied. There'll be a $9 million increase in revenue from HST because of Bill 11. Yeah. This wouldn't happen otherwise. So it's directly related to Bill 11. So my question was simple as to why not reduce the provincial excise tax by the same amount to at least eliminate the impact of the HST.
Mr. Chair, to the member opposite, the member is absolutely correctly. If it wasn't for this bill, if it wasn't for the ability to do this, no, that wouldn't happen. But businesses would close. People would wind up out of work. The end cost that's collected would not be nearly as difficult. I would assume you would not want to be putting something in place that closes businesses, puts people out of work. You're going to have to speak to people who are collecting the revenue and have a plan for any kind of a situation, what they're going to do with that to shift it around. But you're absolutely right. If this doesn't happen, that carbon tax stays in the supply chain, and it's a supply chain that can't afford it. And what you're doing is you're sentencing businesses to at least the worst times they've ever had, and most likely many of them will close. On our watch, I don't want to be responsible for a crumble of the small business by any stretch. So direct questions as it relates to moving that money around, you'll have to direct that to the finance department. But you're right, without this, we've got a serious and significant consequence within the small business system in New Brunswick.
Mr. Chair, isn't it, to the Minister, isn't it the case that without this, that the wholesalers would go to the Energy and Utilities Board, there would be a hearing, and they would be requesting the approval of the Energy and Utilities Board to pass through the fuel charge without this? Is that not the mechanism that would occur if this didn't exist?
All right, Mr. Chair, thank you very much to the member opposite for the question. The EUB, essentially, this legislation is coming in place as a direct result of essentially recommendations from the EUB, because they set the margins. They can't create a means with which this tax, the tax gets incorporated into the fuel price. A change in the legislation is needed for that tax to even be included in the fuel price, so the EUB said that a change to that legislation had to take place.
So my final question, Mr. Chair, is through you to the Minister, is not the only reason for this bill the fact that the federal legislation which establishes the fuel charge refers to a fuel charge rather than a tax. If it were referred to as a tax, that automatically would be passed through under the current legislation, but because it's not called a tax but it's called a fuel charge, this bill is required to enable it to pass through to the retailers.
Were you asking if that's the reason why this okay. Mr. Chair, to the member opposite, absolutely correctly. If it had been labeled by the feds as what it was, a tax, it certainly wouldn't, amendments to the legislation wouldn't have been needed. It could flow through. Because they designated it as a charge, there was no means or mechanism to incorporate that into the final fuel price, so therefore this legislation was required.
Well, that's a great answer, Mr. Chair, through you to the Minister, and clear, so it just seems like a slam dunk, something we shall all support. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. Thank you, Minister, for your answers.